Hello, welcome everyone to Calling All Real Estate Investors. We are live today with Caeli Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. You can always reach us at info@ridgelendinggroup.com, or you can call us at 855-747-4343. That's 855-74-RIDGE. So during today's live call, if you have any questions throughout, please just drop those into the chat. And as they come up, we will answer them as soon as possible. So today's call is going to be discussing when is the right time to refinance. Let's do the math together. So if you're new to Ridge Lending Group, then you may not know that do the math has become Caeli's catchphrase, as she believes in the importance of it. So today she will be diving into that topic and showing you the ropes on how to do the math on your investments to help you make the right decisions throughout your investment journey. So handing it on over to you, Caeli.
Thank you, my dear. Thank you, Carly. Hey, gang. We have a nice intimate number here, a small group. I like that. So if you guys have questions, like Carly said, please make sure to put them in the chat or just raise your hand and we'll just have an open conversation. Before we get started today, it's very important that my housekeeping for this week is this. Boom. Can everybody see that? Are we all on the same page here? Everybody know what I'm putting down? Do you see that? My 49ers this Sunday, for you football fans, or even if you're not a football fan, you know that that's the Super Bowl is this coming Sunday, 49ers versus the Chiefs. And for any of you that are on my side, 49er fans, or if you don't really have a team, then just come over to my side and I'll make you a 49er fan. Let's effing go. And then for you Chiefs fans that might be watching after this, dare I say, suck it? I don't know. That might be too much. Anyway, go Niners for anyone. And this is for you, Jay Lag. Let's go, dude. We got this one. If you're watching this after. Thank you for being here, taking the time. We are going to talk about refinancing and when is it most appropriate to do so. There's a couple of different things that we're going to cover today and then open up for Q&A, all right? So first of all, when we talk about refinance, the first thing that you need to identify, obviously, is why are we refinancing? Are we refinancing to pull cash out? Do we want to harvest equity? Are we refinancing to change or improve the current terms of the loan that we have existing? Or maybe it's a combination of the two. But once you've identified the why of the refinance, then the following list or bullet points is what you need to have answers to before you can decide, yes, it's a good idea to refinance, or no, this may not be opportune. And I have my notes here, so I'll be looking down as we're talking here. You want to know what your current rate is, obviously. So if you guys had a checklist, current interest rate, what is the current balance, outstanding balance on this mortgage that you have? Maybe it's a free and clear property, and that would be kind of another conversation. What do you think the estimated value is? And where did that number come from? How did you ascertain that baseline estimated value? Was it from an appraisal that's 2 years old? If that's the case, okay. Do you have any idea in that particular market? Has the housing price gone up? Has it gone down? Has it stayed the same? Did you look at Zillow? Did you look at Redfin? Do you have a real estate agent or a property manager that's able to give you some comps? I would say that if you're guessing and you really don't have a strong handle on what the value is, it's such an important part of determining whether a refinance is viable at all. I would encourage you to gather as much data as you can from all of those sources. All of the online stuff, the Zillows and et cetera, those online places that you can find approximate values. I would tell you a couple of years ago, that would be the last place I would have looked to baseline a value. But over the years, they've done a good job of getting more on the mark. So I think it's relative. But the more information you can gather, the better prepared you're going to be to get a reasonable estimated value. The appraisal is going to be the end all be all, but you want to try and get as close as you can without falling short. If you come in higher, even better, right? The point is that you don't want to say that you think the value is 200,000 based on an appraisal that's years old and it comes in at 150 or something along those lines, right? You really want to be clear on that, because if you get too far into the process, you probably chewed up your time, your efforts, appraisal costs, different things like that, and you may be left without a way to move forward if the value comes in much lower than what was anticipated. So do your homework there. Next is prepayment penalties. And I want to spend quite a bit of time talking about prepayment penalties and how that plays into a refinance, yes or no. And then when to really decide whether you want a prepayment penalty and how long you want the prepayment penalty to be, because you guys have choices there when we start talking about prepayment penalties. So what's the rate? What do you owe? What's the balance due? What do we think the value is? Is there a prepayment penalty? And if the answer to that question is yes, do you know how to calculate it? Did you get that information when you closed your loan? Did you look at your loan docs? Did you ask your loan officer and say, what is the prepayment penalty calculation? A lot of times it's usually one of a couple things. Let's say it's a 3-year prepay and it's equivalent to a 3-2-1. Okay, 3-2-1 means that in year one of the 36 months, they're going to take the outstanding principal balance times 3%, and that would be the prepayment penalty to get out of that loan, refinance, or if you sell it, in year two, it'll go 2% on a 3-2-1 tier. And in year one, it'll go to 1% of the outstanding balance. And after 3 years, there's no more prepayment penalty. Sometimes the calculation will be 80% of the outstanding principal balance times 6 months of the interest. Okay, that could be the prepay. Or maybe it's a 3-3-3, so that if it's a 3-year prepayment penalty, it's 3%, 3%, 3%, no matter what happens. So make sure that you know what the formula is for the prepayment penalty that was secured for your loan. And subset of this is that when we're talking about mortgages that have prepayment penalties, those are going to be non-QM products. Fannie Freddie loans will never, ever, ever have a prepayment penalty. They're not allowed. But when you move into the non-QM product line, prepayment penalties for investors are very, very common. But you do have that choice. You can choose to have a 3-year, a 2-year, or 1-year, 0 prepayment penalty. Keep in mind that if you go for less than the standard 3-year, the interest rate's going to go up. Okay, just we'll spend a little bit more time on that in a minute. Also with the prepayment penalty, once you have the calculation, did you add that into whether it makes sense within the refi numbers? Okay, I'm going to come back to that in just a second. We'll do an example. Okay, what are the current rents? How long is the lease? Do you have 6 months left on this lease? Do you have a year? Do you have 2 years? What are the rent increases? Do you guys have a feel for a rent appreciation? Is it 2%, 3%, 5%? Does your property manager, if you've got it professionally managed, do they raise the rents every time they turn over a tenant? So does that mean that the average lease is 12 months and every 12 months you're going to expect an increase in rents by 2 or whatever percent it is? Make sure that that information is in that checklist of things that you want to have ready while you're making a decision to refi, yes or no. And then finally here, what are your plans for the property? Big picture stuff. Do you think that this is going to be something that you're going to hold on to for 5 years, 10 years or more? Do you think you're going to 1031 exchange it? Is it going to be held for legacy and your kids or your grandkids or other family members or whatever? Is this something that you think that you're going to turn and burn really quickly? Those are going to be very, very important questions to ask about whether or not a refinance makes sense. And when you get into, let's say the answer is still yes, I still want to refinance based on those variables. The math is going to be determined on how long you're going to have how long you're going to have that loan. Okay, not so much about the property. Asking yourself how long do you think you're going to have the property definitely plays a role, but more importantly, how long do you think you're going to have this loan? And that kind of leads me into the pandemic rates. Most of us here, or that will be listening to this, refinanced or purchased property during the 2020, 21, 22, where interest rates, we got amazingly low interest rates. So we deal with this very often. People don't want to lose out on those 3 and 4% interest rates, which I understand. But the reality is, you guys, that the percentage of you that are going to keep those loans, those low interest rate loans, for 360 payments until you pay them off is extremely low. It's a fraction of a percent. So while talking about that, all of the variables that we just discussed are going to be crucial to knowing when refinancing will be appropriate. So those are the first list of questions that you want to have answered. Okay, and I may actually come up with a bullet point here and we can send it out via the community and you guys can have access to that so that when you're looking at whether or not refinancing makes sense for any particular property, you can kind of start to have that checklist and gather those details for yourself. Now, the next thing is that we've identified, let's start with cash out, okay? So that's the list of things that we need to have answers for. And then now let's say that our determining factor is that for this particular property, we want to cash out. We want to harvest that equity and pull cash out. Okay. So the first question we want to ask ourselves is that once we've gotten the quote, okay, chances are very, very good that the interest rate that you have now versus what you're going to refinance into on a cash out refinance well, it's at least 50-50 anyway, that the new interest rate is going to be higher. Okay. And certainly the loan amount is also going to be higher if we're taking cash out than what it is today. So loan amount's going to be higher, interest rate's going to be higher. So what happens to our cash flow? It's going to be lower, right? It's going to go down. So making sure that we go back to those first questions, what are my rents today? Does this activity, this refinance, does it cover the new payment? Higher rate, higher balance, higher principal balance. Does it cover as is? If it does, great. That's a win-win, because what's going to happen with the proceeds that we're going to get from the cash out, which, reminder everybody, borrowed funds are what? They're not taxable, right? Borrowed funds are non-taxable. The proceeds that we're going to get, we're going to deploy for, chances are, almost certainly, that you're going to take those and you're going to go put them to work for another investment. What is the rate of return or the cash flow from that other investment? So even if the increased interest rate and the increased loan amount puts you in a slightly negative from where you were before, let's say you were cash flowing $100 a month prior to looking at refinance. You're going to pull out 50 grand, 100 grand, whatever the number is. But as a result of the refinance, now you're going to be negative by 50, 150, 200, whatever your numbers are. Make sure that you're layering back in the return of the new investment or investments, right? That seems obvious, but I can't tell you how many times when I'm talking to people about refinancing, they haven't included that in their overall strategy. They haven't added that piece into the math to say, oh yeah, I'm going to be getting $400 cash flow over here. I've got these 3 properties that I'm looking at. They haven't put that back into play in what they're losing in the cash flow here. And then we also have to remember, how are we appreciating our rents? By how much and how often is that happening? So even if you're negative today and you've lost 50 bucks or 100 bucks in cash flow from what you have right now, the cash out refinance is going to put you over that. When will you be back in the black? How long is it going to take? Is your lease coming up at the end of this year? And does that mean that you're going to get a rent increase of 2%? That math is pretty simple, right? Just figure out what your rents are now, add 2% or 3% or whatever it is, and then you can go on from there and figure out how long, if you are going to be in a negative position, how long it's going to take you. I won't spend a lot of time on this part, but there are some investors out there that want those negatives, that they need those losses. Their incomes are so high that they want to have more of those deductions on their Schedule E. We'll dive into that in terms of the interest and higher interest rates that a lot of the cash out refinances are going to produce, because that's also a piece of the math is what else am I going to be able to use in that interest column of the Schedule E? The higher the interest deduction, obviously, the more it's going to impact what you're paying in taxes. I'll come back to that one in a second too. I got that. All right, so I think that was it for cash out. Does anybody have any questions about cash out refinance and what you need to be looking for? We want to know what our returns are going to be. Do you have questions, Carly?
No questions at the moment, but just for those who joined a little bit later, you can go ahead and ask your questions in the chat. Or if you want to ask them verbally, you can raise your hand and I can help to unmute you and then you can ask those questions. So whichever works best for you guys.
Thanks, Carly. So just to recap on cash out, make sure that you're accounting for what your returns are going to be as a result of grabbing at that cash, how long it's going to take to recapture using the return plus appreciation and rents, right? If you guys aren't appreciating your rents, maybe I don't know if you guys want to just kind of wave the hand. How many people appreciate their rents at least every 24 months? So, I mean, most people, it should be everybody on this call. If you're not appreciating your rents every 24 months, I may, and maybe there's circumstances, okay, but I may suggest that it would be useful to check with your property manager. And if there's fear there because they don't want to raise the rents because they don't want to lose the tenant. Now, there are circumstances where that's valid, okay? But more often than not, I may question the efficacy of what they're doing, and I may push back a little bit and say, if they're afraid to lose the tenant for raising rents in a very reasonable way, right? Well, market bearing, maybe their property management vacancy and turnover isn't as strong as it could be, right? A real solid property manager should have no problems within market reason increasing those rents at that modest, and even if it's below a little bit on market, it should be happening. So for anybody that's not seeing that, maybe we have an off-book conversation if you think there's value. Cash out refi will almost certainly increase your payment and reduce your cash flow. What are you getting in return, and how long is it going to take to make up? And remember to include or layer in the tax advantage of doing so, not just in the increase in interest that you're going to claim, but the closing costs. There are certain closing costs within a refinance for investment properties exclusively, would not apply to a primary residence, but you get to deduct some of those expenses on a Schedule E. So all of those things need to be accounted for in a cash out refinance. Let me know if you have any questions about that. Let's move into a rate and term refinance, okay? Rate and term is a little bit more complicated, I think, because it doesn't have that extra return. When we're looking at a rate and term refinance, we're really just deciding, when is it appropriate, the cost of the refinance versus the potential savings, if that's what the refi is for, when it's appropriate to make that move, and how are you going to try and predict the market for rate, right? We are all kind of right on the edge there where we believe that interest rates are going to be coming down soon. Sidebar, the feds are still sticking to their guns. They want to continue. They do. Jerome, most recently in last week, they met, and Jerome had reported that they do think that interest rate Fed fund rates cuts will happen this year. Wall Street kind of, I think, sometimes operate more on hope than in reality. And I kept hearing things like March being the first rate cut. That's not going to happen. Jerome basically put a nail in that coffin. I think June is my prediction for the first rate cut, if I were to guess. So we'll see what my crystal ball says to us. So we're right there in the place. If you're not doing it already, you're kind of waiting to see what happens. When can I refinance? For those of you that got 2, 3, well, you probably didn't get 2% on non-owner occupied, but 3 and 4% for your investment properties, and you're thinking you're not going to touch those, you have the HELOC option, of course, but you're not going to be refinanced. If you're not pulling cash out, obviously you're not going to be refinancing those to improve upon the terms. If you are going to do a rate and term refinance, it is to improve the interest rate. Perhaps it's to get you out of an interest only. You want to get into a principal and interest. I may argue with that. I'm not sure that I agree with taking an interest only and putting it into a principal and interest. If anybody is interested on why that is, put it in the chat. I'll explain. I'm going to move on from that though. Maybe you've got a balloon. Maybe you've got an arm and you're afraid that the adjustments over time are going to be harmful. Maybe you've got to buy a partner out that wants to get out of the property. You're both on the loan and you got to refinance to get him or her off, or whatever it may be. But for the following commentary, let's just assume that you're taking an existing loan of a higher rate and you're waiting to see how much lower the rates are going to be before you refinance, and it makes sense, the cost of the refinance versus the savings of the refinance. Going back to where we started with that checklist of things that you need to have answers for, the primary one is going to be, how long do you think you're going to have this mortgage? How long do you think you're going to have this property? I'd start with mortgage, how long do you have this loan? And then I'd move on to how long you're going to have this property. When doing the math, and take out the tax advantage for a moment, I like to see a break even of about 60 months or less. The shorter the break even, the better, meaning cost versus savings. So if the loan is going to cost $5,000, and there's a difference between it costing $5,000 and you adding it into the balance, the loan balance, versus coming from pocket. If you're coming from pocket on a rate and term refinance, my opinion would be you better be saving a good chunk on a month by month basis to actually take your cash and put it toward that. If it's being rolled into the loan, if the value is there and the balance is there, the loan to value is enough so that you can just add the closing costs to the existing loan, no cash out of pocket. 5,000, let's just, for round numbers, let's say the closing costs are $5,000. And let's say that the savings is $100, right? There's 50 months, 4 point whatever years that is, there's your break even. Now, because you're not coming from pocket, yes, granted, you are going to be adding to your principal balance by that much, I understand, but it isn't realized from actual cash on hand. And you have that write-off. So coming back to that piece, you've got the write-off of the cost, closing cost, well, the points anyway, and you've got the same interest deduction, because you're probably not doing it unless you're reducing the interest. So that may go down a little bit. So make sure that that's part of the overall math that you're doing. 60 months or less. If you've got, but let's say that one of your questions is, I'm not going to have this property past 36 months. I'm going to be selling it for whatever reason. And you do that math. Okay, now here's where it gets a little bit more complicated. Let's say that you land on 4 years as the break even cost versus savings, but you're going to get rid of it in 36 months. You have plans to 1031 exchange or whatever it is. Okay. but your math, break-even math, says it's going to take you that 4 years. What to do? Well, remember immediately, because remember those costs that we're talking about are rolled into the loan. You're going to be getting that monthly savings of $100 over 36 months. Okay, I'm probably going to say, when we look at all of the pieces to the puzzle, I'm going to say that that refinance for that scenario makes sense for your overall objective. Take the cash flow, the extra $100 a month, because this could be stockpiled for other reasons, other investment reasons, of course. Let's see here. Let's go back to, actually, one other comment. We talk about rate and term refinance. A lot of times people will say, well, I've already got 10 years into it's built into this loan, right? Maybe the loan that they've had for 10 years, and they don't want to start that clock ticking again for the 30 years. That's a fair comment. And I think it only applies if they really think that that particular mortgage is going to pay off in 30 years, that they're not going to be doing anything else with it. And it also is going to come to play too, what kind of savings, right? So what if they've had it for 10 years? If it can save them $200 a month all day long, that's a fair assessment. I would say that's a good refinance on an investment property. All right, let's go back real quick and talk about prepayment penalties. When to get, any questions? Anybody have anything, Carly?
Not
Not
at the
yet?
moment, but pop those in
Okay.
the chat, guys, as they come up.
Excuse me. Let's talk about prepayment penalties and when it makes sense to get a prepayment penalty, whether it be in a rising rate environment or a falling rate environment. Obviously, you guys have to determine a prepayment penalty and if it makes sense based on how long you're going to hold that property or when you think you're going to refinance that property. So having those conversations is important. And the math is similar to everything else that we're doing, that cost versus savings. If a 1-year prepayment penalty is appropriate, let's say you purchase a property in a market that's going to appreciate beautifully, okay? And the difference between a 3-year prepay and a 0-year prepay, no prepayment whatsoever, is it's going to take you from a nice positive to a decent negative. So then we kind of look in between and we say, okay, what does a 1-year prepayment penalty do? Maybe we can live with a 1-year prepayment penalty because we still have a little bit of cash flow, but it leaves us that opportunity to refinance in a year's time and pull the cash out because we know we're in an appreciating market and that's going to happen. We're going to harvest that equity and continue to invest and buy more properties. So the keys there are going to be figuring out that rate difference between a 0, 1, 2, 3. In some cases, we have some investors that we sell to that let us go to 5-year prepayment penalty. So figuring out what the payment difference is, aka rate, I guess, but more about the payment difference between those different layers of prepayment penalty and what the overall objective of the property is going to be. There was one other thing about prepay I was going to tell you guys. Oh, yeah, and then calculating what the prepay is going to be. So let's go back real quick and say that you chose a 3-year, okay? And the prepayment penalty on that particular product is a 80% of the outstanding principal balance times 6 months of interest. Okay, so if we can do that math, and let's just assume that, you know, you're going to refinance in about a year. Your objective is you think you're going to refinance in about a year because you think there's going to be enough equity. Maybe you bought it at a distressed price. It's already got some equity in it, just not enough to make sense on a refinance. You're going to hold it for 12 months because appreciation is at 12, 15%, whatever it is. Okay, so our objective is we want to refinance this property in a year. A 0 prepay is going to be a real high interest rate. So we want to maybe do a 1-year, or maybe we're going to calculate what the prepay is going to be, and we're just going to pay the prepayment penalty. Okay, that math, once you kind of put all the pieces together, should be very obvious. If the prepayment penalty, when all is said and done, if we take 80% of the outstanding principal balance times 6 months worth of interest, and that number ends up being $1,800, okay, but the difference in interest rate with and without that is going to create cash flow loss or gain of $2,000, right? The math will be obvious once you start putting the pieces together and connecting the dots. There shouldn't be a lot of question. And if you guys ever get hung up on something like that, just call me, email me, and we'll go through the scenario. I should have probably had better examples for you so that you guys could do that, but I'll put that probably on the community page as well with that checklist. For those that started late, just real quickly, the first thing you want to do when determining whether or not you want to refinance is figure out why. Are we pulling cash out, or are we replacing the existing loan with some new loan for whatever reason that is? What is your current interest rate? What is your current balance? What do you think the current value is? Make sure that you're quantifying where that number came from. Is it legitimate? Is there a prepayment penalty? If there is a prepayment penalty, will the loan to value allowance maximum support paying that prepayment penalty? And does it make sense within the big picture of what you're trying to do, cash out versus refinance? What are the current rents? What's the length left on the lease of that current tenant's lease? How often do the rents increase and by how much? And what are your plans for this property? You're going to be harvesting equity over time, 1031 exchange. You're going to hold on to it for legacy and estate planning, etc. So I got that. I think that covers most of the things that I would tell you guys about when it is appropriate to refinance. Overall, that break even is the number one. When you get all of that data compiled, the break even is the key. Cost, savings, dividing those numbers will give you a number of months it'll take to get you there. And then you can answer the rest of the questions and whether or not that is appropriate for you. One other thing I would say, if for those that are kind of going to be on the sidelines waiting to see interest rates go down, remember this: interest rates go down slower, unfortunately, than they go up. So if we think that by June, we're going to have a 0.5 percentage point in rate decrease, that's a big number in a couple of months. But let's just say that that's the case. What does that mean for you? What is the payment difference now at 6.5 versus in June at, what did I say, 6.5% at 6? Is it substantial or not? The other thing to keep in mind for anybody that's kind of waiting on the sidelines for interest rates to hit a certain number, and if you have a metric in mind that you need to keep the payment at this is the payment that you need, and you can figure out what that interest rate needs to be, you can get pretty close. You can be watching the market. If you're paying attention, you can just email me and say, hey, where do we think rates are going to be in a month or 6 months or whatever? I'll give you my best guess. But the one thing that you really need to account for is, where will the home value be? So don't just be looking at the rates exclusively. Okay, it's not going to be, what if the values drop in a way that precludes you from being able to take advantage of the new interest rate? That could also be problematic. Now, that's probably not as likely, but I would still say that if you're not looking at both of the elements, the value of the home today, if you're going to try and forecast for an interest rate in a year or 6 months or whatever it is, fine, but you better be looking at the writing on the wall that says this is where home appreciation or depreciation is expected to be in that market. For those of you that have listened to me for any length of time, you know that I check the FHFA.gov website. Maybe put that in your browser, Federal Housing Finance Agency. This is the US government. They obviously have very deep pockets. They spend a lot of time researching past, present, and future appreciation. Not every single small area market's going to be in there, but the bigger markets nearby your particular, where your particular property is located, should be close enough. You can get on mark that way. There are data, it's called data tools, I think, within that website, where you can go in, look for the city, the area, and then you'll be able to get the reports that say where appreciation has been the last 5 years, where it is today, and then they'll even forecast where the expectation is going to be for the next 12, 24, 36 months. And that can help dictate whether waiting on a lower interest rate versus what you think the value of the property is going to be. Because remember, if the point is to improve the term or pull cash out, and you're waiting, the futuristic value of that property is equally as important as the interest rate, right? It should be. You should be looking at both of those things. Okay, that's what I got for you on refinances and when. The shorter amount of time to recapture cost versus savings is obviously the better number that you want to get. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you should or shouldn't refinance. There's all those other variables you have to take into account and consider before making any decisions. What do we got, Carly? Anything?
Nothing at the moment, but pop those questions in if you guys have. I also put in the link to the community. If you are not a part of that already, you can please join us there. And like Caeli said, we're going to have the checklist and some examples for you on there, as well as other, valuable educational tools often are posted in there. So thank you guys so much.
Okay, let's see. Do we have anything? If no one's got questions, if you guys have something come up or you've got a scenario, just email me. Okay, if you've got hey, listen, this is the property, here are the numbers. what interest rate do you think is going to make most sense for me to refinance if this is my goal? Pulling cash out or this? If you give me the details, then I can give you my 1.3 cents worth, take what you want, you leave the rest. What do we have, Carly, for when's our next live?
Our next live is going to be on the 20th. So that is 2 weeks from today. And let me just look up here what we are doing for that topic. Okay, guys. We're going to be talking about remote real estate investing. So Caeli's going to go over pros, cons, and tips, advantages and challenges for remote real estate investing. And we have asked in the community, and you can feel free to also just email us some tips of your own, some things that you've gone through. And, Caeli can touch on those, or you can bring those to the conversation on the day of, whatever works best for you.
I think there's going to be a lot of good content on that, guys. The people struggle with sight unseen, and I think there's some really good, at least in my experience and the things I've done right and the things that I've done wrong, in finding properties that produce the returns that we expect with the least amount of brain damage possible, right? That's a trick. It's not something that you just can wake up and say, okay, I want to invest in this market because I hear there's good things about it, and here's my money and give me the property. You guys know that. So I think there'll be some good content there. The other thing that I'm kicking around, and Carly, maybe we'll ask this question in the community, but for those of you here, feel free to let us know. Once a month, I don't know what day, I don't know, the third Wednesday of the month or whatever it ends up being, where I will probably be live somewhere. So just if for conversations about real estate, anything that has come up that you guys say, hey, I had this deal and it looked like this, or this happened here, I had this tenant that did this, or the laws in this state for this, whatever it may be. I'm probably going to have one day a month where if anybody that wants to join, I will be there for at least 10 minutes. If people start coming in, then I'll stay and we'll have a conversation. We'll see how that goes. So if there's value there, let us know, guys. And then, for the bigger pockets, Carly, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody what that is? I know that we're putting it out there on social media and stuff, but will you share with whomever's going to listen later and who we've got here today what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So guys, after the live with Caeli's, and as well as every Tuesday of the month, Caeli is going to be doing a live Q&A on the platform called Bigger Pockets. So this is a really great thing for investors to go on to learn lots of different things, but Caeli is going to be in one of the forums under real estate professionals, mortgage brokers, and lenders. And she is going to be doing a live Q&A. So it's going to be over chat. And so you can pop your questions in there, anything like she was saying that might come up during the week, or maybe something you weren't able to ask her in the live with Caeli calls like we're having now. You can go over to Bigger Pockets. It's free to join. And like I said, it's one of the forums in real estate professionals under mortgage brokers and lenders. And then Caeli will be doing a Q&A there.
Yeah, we'll put on the community too, guys. We'll probably put instructions on how to find it. It's a little bit hard. I went in there myself and I had to kind of dig around to find where that specific place was for the live forum. So we'll put something out that might be easier for you to follow and get to. If you're interested, I will be there every Tuesday. What time, Carly?
Yeah, so around 2:15 p.m. Pacific time to
Okay.
about 2:30. And as engagement increases, Caeli will stay for longer. But for now, you can either answer those questions and get them answered live in the moment, or she'll answer them afterwards as she can.
Anything real estate related, guys. I mean, if I don't have the answer, I'll get one. I promise you that. Okay, there's our 30 minutes. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you all very much. We're on standby, ridgelendinggroup.com, info@ridgelendinggroup.com. My personal email, cridge@ridgelendinggroup.com, 855-74-RIDGE. See you guys soon.